What's going on, everybody? It's the Bulls Show, aka Aiden, and welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be talking about how successful our Western Conference trip was for the Chicago Bulls, the importance of it being successful, and just overall the progression that we may have taken, or even some of the step backs we have taken in this Western Conference trip. We all said that November was going to be the month for the Chicago Bulls where we get to test ourselves at the highest level just to see what kind of teams, what kind of opponents we face and how we walk out of this trip. And although we only versed these teams twice, these games do matter, and playing them away from home and going positive on this trip does matter. But before we get started, please like and subscribe to the Bulls Show, turn notifications on, and let me know in the comments below your thoughts about the Chicago Bulls Western Conference trip and how important it is. Now, I'm not going to go into too much specifics because we will have a Bulls Weekly out tomorrow in relation to the Chicago Bulls previous week and upcoming week, but I just want to talk about the importance of the Western Conference trip. As you all know, we have already been through the Western Conference trip. We are traveling probably back to Chicago as we speak, and this trip ended up in a 3-2 record for the Chicago Bulls. We picked up 3 very huge victories away from home, and we lost 2 really important games away from home as well. Obviously, the importance of going positive, I think many of us understood that the month of November was the time for the Chicago Bulls. The Western Conference trip, the first one of our year. Many teams will have to go through this, and it's a formality in many ways. Over the course of the years, the West beat up on the East teams. That was their goal every single time that a Western Conference team or Eastern Conference team came to the West. That's why the West was so dominant and the East always felt short-handed. The East always felt lopsided to the point where the 8th seed would usually be a negative record to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, because the West always beat up on the East. No matter who it was, the West was always the dominant league or the dominant conference in the NBA. So going there and winning 3 away games against the Los Angeles Clippers, even though it was without Kawhi, the Lakers, we dominated the Lakers and we beat Denver. These are 3 games that you'd love to have under your belt, and this is a Western Conference trip that you'd love if you're a Chicago Bulls fan. And the importance of it is massive. The importance of it for our season is massive. This could potentially be game-changing in terms of the end of the season. I know we might not see it now. I know many Bulls fans will probably say it was good. It could have been better. It definitely could have been better. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the future as well. It could have been better. But 3-2 on a Western Conference trip where you're versing high-caliber teams is a really good sight to see. And now talking about the importance of it. At the end of the season, we will need these wins. These wins will quantify up for something, because some of these teams have yet to go on the Western Conference trip, have yet to go and verse some of the West teams, and some of them might not be as successful as the Chicago Bulls, and some teams might be more successful than the Chicago Bulls teams. But the reality is every Eastern Conference team will go through this, and every Eastern Conference team will have different results. So the fact that we had a positive result, only relying on ourselves, focusing on what we can control, looking at what our schedule and how we can win these games, we have to keep on relying on ourselves. The Eastern Conference, the Eastern Conference will beat up on each other. You will see wins and losses from every team in the East pretty much getting win over each other. It's the Eastern Conference at the end of the day, and we have so many games in the East that, yes, you will see some games where you lose an unfortunate game. You lose a couple of games to Eastern Conference teams. We've already seen it with Philly. We've seen it with the Knicks. We will lose to Eastern Conference teams. But the West, we only get twice. And winning away is very, very important for the Chicago Bulls. Not only does it matter, but it's a morale booster for the Chicago Bulls as well. We have not been very successful in our Western Conference trips in previous years. And again, the Denver Nuggets history, the way that we haven't beat Denver in 6 years outside of this victory now against them, kind of proves that we've not always been successful against the Western Conference in history. When history looks, you look at Zach LaVine, who's been a big part of that history of losing in the Western Conference, and now we've hopefully, because we haven't versed every Western Conference team yet, it's not like that, but hopefully this is a sign of what things can come in terms of the Chicago Bulls going to the West and beating some teams over there. It's a morale booster. So when we return home with a crowd and energy that knows how important it is to go out and be positive in that Western Conference trip, that knows what it's going to be like when they finally step foot at the United Center again, to bring the energy and the crowd up for the game, because we've all missed the Chicago Bulls, and the Chicago Bulls fans will be there to show how much they miss this team. it just goes to show it's even more important, because if we ended up having a lackluster Western Conference trip, maybe that energy returning home won't be there. Maybe that success at home might struggle because it could be a confidence destroyer going to the West and losing so many games. And I think some teams have already been through it and they've ended up resulting in worse records, and their confidence is down the drain. So our confidence is still very high. Our confidence in beating every team that we face is still very present, and it's all thanks to being or having a great Western Conference trip. Now let's talk about what we've seen in this Western Conference trip and how much we learned. What are the positives we saw and the negatives that we saw? Our two losses in the Western Conference trip, in my opinion, were horrifically bad. The Golden State Warriors was a blowout. Obviously, Golden State are having a phenomenal season so far. Stephen Curry is having an MVP caliber season. And for my money, if they're going to keep going at this rate, he will be MVP. But when it comes to that game specifically, we had a terrific first half and a horrible second half, which resulted in a massive blowout for the Golden State Warriors in their victory against us. That's a really bad loss to take, but obviously with the best record in the league, the Golden State Warriors, I think many people will look back on that game and see that's not a bad loss to have. But the Portland Trail Blazers game, ladies and gentlemen, that loss was really hurtful for the Chicago Bulls, because we had that control. That game was in our possession. We had that 20-point lead and we blew it. We gave it away to the Portland Trail Blazers later on. Clutch situations and all, we should not have let them come back. And those two games are really big indications of just when things go wrong, they can go terribly wrong. When the Chicago Bulls are not up for a game, you could see a potential blowout, or you could see big leads come back from the Chicago Bulls. And that's just something that, unfortunately, we need to try and overlook and try to make sure we don't end up seeing this happen on occasion, or at least in most games. We need to make sure that teams don't have the will and the power to come back against the Chicago Bulls, because we have seen that in these two losses. And they're bad losses to take. The Portland game is a really, really frustrating loss, but the Warriors one, we got blown out, but many people will probably see that as a bad loss as well, and many people will see it's not really bad losing to the Warriors. The victories, however, are more important. Obviously, Denver, 2006 or something like that. We haven't won in 6 years, and 2006 was the last time we won away from home, or some stat like that. That's big. Obviously, this is the first time beating the Clippers and the Lakers, I believe, away from home in 10 years. I'm pretty sure that was the stat. So we've made some pretty big history in this Western Conference trip as well. And again, the morale will be extremely high after going to the Clippers and beating them, after going to the Lakers and pretty much making the Lakers have a breakdown in terms of their own game plan. Going to Denver and taking advantage of their small ball lineup with our small ball lineup. And these victories will matter. These victories are morale boosters, and these victories are history making for the Chicago Bulls in many ways, considering recent results that we did suffer. We got to see a little bit of our clutch situation. We got to see a little bit of how we'll go in the clutch. And obviously there is still work to be done, but we do realize now that Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan are going to be the main people to take clutch shots. And we got a lot of information about that in that Western Conference trip, the Portland Trail Blazers and the Denver Nuggets games, to be specific. We also saw that we can win without Nikola Vucevic. And although it's going to be really, really hard to win some games without Nikola Vucevic, we have done fairly well without him in the lineup, which makes it even more exciting when we get to see him return to the Chicago Bulls and play at a high level and just have another added body into the team that can be an offensive firepower weapon whenever we need to use him. So we have learned a lot of things in this Western Conference trip. And another thing that we have learned is that this team is, although it has its negatives, although it suffered a blowout loss and it has suffered a comeback win by Portland, this team has a really good ability to bounce back from bad losses. For example, the Warriors game was a terrible loss. We bounced back by beating both LA teams at their home ground. For the Portland Trail Blazers game, we ended up suffering a major comeback loss against them. And then we end up bouncing back against a really strong, or I wouldn't say really strong, but a Denver Nuggets team that has had a really good standing at home. Then obviously, even you go to the Eastern Conference and you have both of those losses to Philly, you retaliate by beating Brooklyn and Dallas. we beat Utah as well. So this team does have an act of bouncing back when things don't go their way in previous games. When things don't go your way in Portland, it's a really good thing to have to bounce back against other teams in the NBA. So ladies and gentlemen, these are some of the things that I've learned from this Western Conference trip. This is why the Western Conference trip is very important. And this is also another reason why I believe we've walked out with a big morale booster and hopefully more confidence going back to the United Center. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you're new. We'll get a Bulls weekly episode for you guys tomorrow as we look towards the Knicks, the Pacers, and other games throughout the week. We've got a big week, ladies and gentlemen, a week full of home games, and let's hope we could get the United Center rocking. We're going to miss our home fans. Take care and peace.